Welcome to the London Property Podcast, your trusted guide through the complex and ever-evolving world of London real estate. We help clients manage, protect, and grow their property wealth by connecting them with the right expertise from finance, law, and tax to construction, design, and strategic advice. Through conversations with industry leaders, we bring you clear, practical insight into the trends, challenges, and opportunities shaping the market. Let's dive in.
Hello, welcome to London Property. I'm your host, Farnaz Fazaipour, and we're delighted to welcome to the show Angela Niering-Wren.
Hello, hi.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Who's at Arbuthnot Latham, who we've personally borrowed from, and I must say it was a very pleasant experience. So we're delighted to have you on the show to tell us more about how the market is changing. If you could introduce yourself to our audience, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely, Farnaz. Thank you, and thank you for having me. So, as Farnaz said, I'm Angela. I'm a senior commercial banker at Arbuthnot Latham. I work within the relationship team for the real estate finance, so people who borrow from the bank to invest in property. And I've got a portfolio of clients that I manage and acquire new business as well, so bring on new lending to the bank. I've been in financial services for longer than I care to mention, but certainly in property for the last 20 years. And it's ever changing, definitely.
And it's not just only changing in finance. I mean, you know, we interview people from all areas of specialization that affects property owners, investors, overseas buyers. And it's changing, you know, not only the market, the pricing, the law, the tax, the planning, everything is changing.
Yeah.
So we're going complete overhaul. And I think this whole thing started from about 13 years ago, in my experience. I don't know from your side.
Absolutely. I can remember back in about 2014 when EPCs, energy performance certificates, were a thing for the future, and we were planning for that. We're now looking at a tightening of the level there that's coming in, which will bring more change for property investors. And all the other legislation that's coming in terms of building safety, Renters' Rights Act, and this all impacts on the landlord, which ultimately then impacts on the whole industry. So yeah, it's quite an interesting time to be in the industry, but it's also a tricky one, I think, from an investor's perspective.
And how would you say that that's impacted the lending market directly?
So the lending market has been hit from all sides in many respects. There's the legislation attached to the safety of the property and the quality of the property and the regulatory performance that a landlord has to adhere to now. But then also from the lender's perspective, there's the regulatory compliance that was brought in following the global financial crisis and the allocation of capital that the banks have to hold. And so the restrictions in terms of the lending criteria that you can offer to a client in terms of loan to value, that has come down, the serviceability, the evidence of serviceability, all those metrics have been tightened alongside then monitoring the regulatory performance of the landlord as well, to make sure that the landlord is providing quality and safe environments for their tenants to live in.
So it's no longer really a game, and we've touched on this in other reports that we've done, but it's no longer a game for the amateur, is it? The buy-to-let market is now very much becoming an institutional kind of corporate environment, isn't it? It's become very difficult for individuals to passively participate.
There are many portfolios out there. I think they were acquired sort of around the 80s and 90s, the 1980s and 1990s, where they were accidental landlords and they bought 1, 2, and they ended up with 30, 40 properties.
Yeah.
It becomes it's a totally different ballgame now. And there are those investors who they're in two camps. They're either going to move forward with the legislation and professionalize their activities, or they may decide to exit because they don't want to have the administrative burden and to have to gear up their team within their team to be able to manage that administrative burden, because it's not becoming something you can do off the side of the desk while you do something else. It is a full-time professional job.
It's a profession. It's kind of generationally, if you look back to when Margaret Thatcher introduced the short-hold tenancy, it's coming to the end of that generation.
Yes. Yeah.
And how are you seeing that generation? Are they being replaced by the younger people, or are they looking at a completely different way of investing in the real estate market?
I think it's interesting because it does depend. That generation are obviously coming to an age in their life where they may not want to continue to work. I don't think an investor in property or an entrepreneur really retires at any point, but they do want somebody to take over the reins. Do they have somebody? Is there a continuity there within the family of somebody who wants to take that on? And there are some where the children have come up and they've studied property management, and there are qualifications that they can obtain, and they become the next custodians, and they're already in that. They're already in that train of thought where that regulatory piece is part and parcel of what they have learned and is a natural for them. If however, the family don't want to take that portfolio on and there isn't natural succession, that becomes a difficult thing. And it's at that point, I think, where people reevaluate and say, do I want to continue here? Do I want to sell? And there are portfolios that have come to market and will come to market, no doubt, in the next couple of years as well, with the onset of the Renters' Rights Act, where they will be absorbed most likely by people who've already got property portfolios, and they have economies of scale, and they already have a machine there to manage all the regulatory piece, and they can easily absorb those additional properties and bring them under their wing and manage them.
That's the important thing, isn't it? Scaling in a market that's full of regulation is really the way to manage it, isn't it?
It is.
Because the overheads are too high if you haven't got the numbers there.
Yeah, and if you've got a good system in place, then these events become something just to deal with and not something you need to learn about. You've already learnt about them. You've done them with your portfolio. So how hard is it now to bring these 10 properties, 15 properties in and bring them up to the standard and bring them up to the level where your current portfolio is? I think it's a very logical progression for many investors.
Yeah. But you see, the thing that I always wonder is, yes, scale matters, being a professional landlord matters, and the kind of mom and pop accidental investors, which have kind of been added to now because the people who can't sell have also become accidental landlords, not just the people who got married and kept their flats or inherited their flats. So that in prime central London, I really struggle to see, outside of the estates and some of the already established portfolios that are corporately run, how do you replace those people in prime central London are you seeing anybody kind of aggregating all of the individual units and becoming bigger players, but actually in prime central London? Because obviously you can do these things a lot easier in zones outside of prime central London, but how's that being addressed?
It's much harder, I think, in central London because, as you say, the capital values are higher, and so therefore the cash input that an investor needs to make is higher.
Yeah.
The yields, the rental income that you earn from a London property versus the value, those yields are so compressed that to service sizable debt within central London is very challenging. And now, as you say, with the Renters' Rights Act coming in and that managed progress in terms of rental increments, you can't just keep on increasing your rent. You're not going to be able to market the property to the highest bidder, if you like, anymore.
Yeah.
And so therefore, that consideration of what your property is earning versus how much capital you need to put into it, that relationship is a very important one. And so the people who will do that, it's difficult to sort of categorize where they're going to come from, but there will be people who may have a lowly geared portfolio, a lowly leveraged portfolio, and they can maybe gear up a little bit against it. They've got a bit of cash surplus income from their existing portfolio to be able to provide that equity injection into buying that portfolio. And the larger the organisations are, the the greater their capacity, I think, to borrow as well, because they have that professional approach and they can deliver to a lender the information packs that they need to make those lending requests supportable as well. I think that's another important aspect, is that regulatory piece that you need to adhere to is important from the compliance perspective, but it also is valuable information for a lender to be able to look at those things and see how those properties are managed. And that automatic management information pack should be more forthcoming now and should be easier. So it works in synergy, but where are those investors going to come from? I think London is still seen as a safe place to invest in terms of property. The UK as a whole is a safe place to invest in property. If you look at the sort of 30-year progression, although there hasn't been huge capital rises of the previous sort of century, if you like, there's still overall the trajectory is upwards. And so it's seen as a relatively safe place economically and I think sort of internal conflict as well. If you look around the world, and it can be quite a dangerous place at the moment, and I think London's still quite seen as quite safe. So overseas investors, I imagine, will still be looking at London as well.
With a more medium-term view rather than short-term view, because people are coming in here kind of flipping and making money quickly, whereas now you actually need people to be dedicated to the cause.
You do, yeah. Short-term returns is not going to be there unless you've got a unique property. It's going to have to be medium to long-term investment that sees gains. Protection of capital as well. You're looking at capital protection.
And going back to what you were saying about, a lender wants to see the kind of everything already organized when they're doing their due diligence, it kind of connects you back to the professional landlord, because, the more prepared you are, the more you've got your ducks in a row, the more you're running a really slick operation, the easier it is for you to operate with all this regulation around you, but also to be seen as proving to be that landlord that people want to back.
Yes.
And that's become quite important, I would imagine, in this.
They tend to be ahead of the curve in terms of the legislation that's coming up the ramp, because they have a portfolio which can be severely impacted by any changes. So they will be on the front foot in terms of dealing with that legislation. And that makes it, when you look at a portfolio lend, and you might think, big numbers, 34 million against a portfolio or something like that. Actually, they're the easier ones to manage as a lender, because they have got the information at the finger of a button. The smaller landlord that hasn't automated everything and isn't on the front foot and is trying to catch up, they need more guidance and support and help. They get there, but they just need more guidance and support.
So you're patient.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the most important part.
It's a relationship, and you want to work with the client, and so you help them as much as you can to get to that point.
Banks want to lend; they're not trying to be difficult.
It's mutually beneficial.
Exactly. So, how would you say that AI has helped some of these portfolios, some of these landlords, big or small?
I think the larger landlord is probably looking at AI. The smaller landlord, I don't think at this moment in time it's on their horizon at all, and how they can use it. There will be programs coming out, I'm sure, that will be marketed and people will start to look at them. Right now, I think the AI it's quite an expensive tool. The software is quite expensive if you want to buy something. So probably it's limited to something like Copilot or your AI on your Google for the smaller landlord. But the larger landlord, they will no doubt be used in statistical analysis of where to invest and using AI to interrogate that data. But the smaller landlord, it's unlikely, I think, at this stage.
You're listening to the London Property Podcast. We help clients manage, protect, and grow their property wealth. If you find this conversation useful, don't hesitate to get in touch. Now, back to the conversation.
And as a bank, now not giving my own age away, but we actually borrowed from Arbuthnot Latham to do refurbishment development in Cadogan Square, going back to when our relationship with the bank started. What kind of products do you have? Do you only lend to buy-to-let landlords, or how deeply do you get involved on the lending side with regards to property?
So historically, we have lent to help people like yourselves do development and do property improvements, add a floor on here and there to a property. Currently, at the moment, we're restricted to doing residential investments mostly.
Yeah.
We do commercial property as well, but residential investment is the main product that we have. We are looking at reintroducing. Potentially looking at ways we can do some kind of assistance with development funding, but it's again down to this regulatory piece, and the regulations are changing in Jan 2027 with a little known thing called Basel 3.1, which is the governance of the bank's capital. And to lend on a development, even if you've got a ready-made portfolio which is earning lots of cash, throwing off lots of cash from its rental income, and you haven't got any borrowing on it, and you want to borrow up against it to do a development, that equity out is still classed as development, and so has to be priced differently because it's much more capital intensive. We can do 3 times the lend on a resi property than we can for a commercial property because of the amount of capital it uses, and it's much more expensive again for development because that development phase is quite sort of dangerous.
Risky for you.
It's a risky phase.
Yeah.
It's a risky phase, and you don't have anything until you've got practical completion on a development, and so that period through the development phase is highly sort of risky and could cost the bank if it went wrong, and so it's much more capital intensive. So for that reason, at the moment, we're reviewing where we are on that.
And also planning and delivery is becoming complicated also for people, right? Because with the building safety regulator,
yes,
we had some hairy things in our last interview with somebody who's an architect, actually an academic and teaches at the AA. And, by the end of it was quite difficult to smile, having listened to what's coming and how it's being managed. Because what he was saying is that if in the middle of the development, you suddenly want to change something, you have to stop everything you're doing, which must be a nightmare for a bank.
It will be, because when you're looking at a deal for a development, you're looking at the term of the development term, because all the time that is running, most likely interest is rolling up, and its interest is the money that you use to do a development is an integral part of the development, is as much as any bricks or pipes that you use. It's a tool, and the longer you have that tool, the more expensive it is.
Yeah,
and that's eating into your profit at the end.
Yeah.
And that profit margin that a developer makes on the property is squeezed constantly now, with the additional costs, with the additional sort of inflation impact on materials and labour. So anything that squeezes that profit margin is a worry.
Yeah. And I mean, you could be strict with yourself as a developer and say, right, I'm not going to change anything, but then you don't know what you might discover. And then you might discover something that requires you to go back to the building regulators. And apparently you're not allowed to do anything until they come and go. And, we all know how much these things can take to actually resolve.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously a very important aspect of development, because nobody wants to see another event like Grenfell. And all of this has come off the back of Grenfell. And the importance of following the rules that you've laid down for yourself in your development. And if you change anything, what is the impact of that change? The responsible person for the development, in terms of the fire risk analysis, that overall arching person, they're the ones that need to be certain that any changes made don't adversely affect the safety of that building in any way. It's a huge responsibility. So the builder regulator is still finding its feet as well. They are probably not staffed up to the level they might need to be to deliver swift responses. And so, yes, it does impact on the timescales for the development, the finalising of the development.
Yeah. One of the things that he was telling us, which was quite scary, was that basically the building safety professionals had to get reassessed and re-qualify.
Yes.
And some of the biggest companies didn't pass the test and actually went to liquidation. So yeah, the teething problems seem to be quite big.
And then you've got to think about the buildings that were built before the Act came in.
Yeah, I was going to ask that next.
Retrospectively, the regulator will be calling for the responsible individual to provide information to enable them to be certified to a level. Whilst all of the Building Safety Act doesn't apply, there are certain elements that will apply to existing buildings. I think one of the common things is fire stopping along the corridors is one of the big issues, and they have to install additional fire stopping in existing buildings. That's additional cost.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, consideration as to what's the safety risk to the building, what's the impact on your building's insurance.
Getting
It's a headache.
Those files is sounding like a huge task. Because I guess from your perspective, you might have some people you've lent to already that suddenly would have to change cladding, for example.
Yeah, I mean the cladding issue as a whole is mostly identified. Most properties, if not all properties, have been tested, and if there was defective cladding, at the very least that cladding's been removed from the property. So they may not look very pretty, but they're safer.
Safe.
They're safer.
Right.
The remediation of putting the cladding back on is another issue.
Yeah.
And certainly when we are lending against a property which might have had that external wall safety certificate, we will look at that, the requirement for one of those, and make sure that it's in place. Or at least if it's in course of being put in place, how far away are they from getting it signed off before we would lend money against it? And it will be something we will monitor and observe carefully. What are the procedures that the landlord has in place in the interim period in terms of the fire protection of the building while they get that cladding sorted? And of course, these fire stops, internal fire stops, are very important.
Yeah, that sounds like a crucial one. How would you say that all of this is going to affect housing delivery? So obviously we've got very big ambitions from the government, and I don't know how they're going to deliver 1.5 million homes in the time that they said. But how do you think that's going to impact?
It's going to have a massive impact in terms of the speed of delivery, the ability of anybody to deliver those homes, the issues of how you fund such a development, how do you provide the skill set to do the builds, and then getting the planning permission and that all important planning permission sorted is just the start. Because until you've got that planning permission, you've got a scheme, you can't even begin to think, well, how much is this going to cost me? How much money do I need? That's the start of the journey. So until that planning permission is in place and that regulatory piece that box is being ticked, it's very difficult to even get off base one.
So you can't really model it until you've got all that information.
And then you need to go to tender to get your tender prices for the scheme to make it viable. I had a conversation with an architect the other week and asked that question: are developers coming to you yet saying, "This is what I want. This is my budget. Design me something that fits with that budget," where they have to be mindful of the materials that they use and the schemes that they design to fit within that budget to make that scheme viable. It's the viability of the scheme. And any developer who provides housing is going to need it to be viable. And so all those aspects that we talked about earlier play into that. And if there's delays along the way, then delivery is a challenge. I think the last numbers that I heard, they were woefully below where they needed to be per annum to deliver those number of homes by the end of that first term. It'll be interesting to see what the new leader will do to try and escalate that and make that a possibility. They have a task on their hands.
Yes. I'm laughing because when we came to the event that you recently hosted he was referred to as the Messiah. He's going to get it right, everything that everybody else got wrong. But hey, listen, you never know. It might be the right time.
Big shoes to fill.
It might be the right time for a new person. I always think it's about the timing rather than the people. But anyways, I've always said that in property, you can always make money, but you've got to adapt.
Yes.
And you've got to be willing to move.
Yeah.
Which again goes back to that professional property investor. And, you look at the market and say, right, what are my opportunities? So adaptability being key. Are you seeing anything like that coming your way where you think, oh, that was a really clever way of going to market or of doing something?
I think the biggest thing that we're seeing now is how landlords, instead of letting the properties directly themselves and having to deal with all that regulatory paperwork, they are letting them on long leases to councils and to housing associations. And on that basis, within that contract, there will be an agreement for the maintenance and all those regulatory aspects to be dealt with by the person letting the property, who are then on letting it to individuals. And then the landlord, they might let it at a slightly lower than market rent for the benefit of not having that headache. They've got that surety of income for 5-10 years, however long the lease is for, and they still have their property.
Yeah.
And I think that is definitely something that we're seeing more of, and we are getting more and more inquiries coming through the door with that as the end sort of tenant.
Yeah.
And in terms of bringing something to market, I don't think there's a new way of inventing something, bring to market. I don't know, you might know more about that than I do, but certainly it still seems to be market the property.
Yeah. I mean, I think that people are looking, certainly private equity is looking at more lifestyle driven investments. But obviously that again takes you outside of prime central London. But if you were to translate that into central London, I guess the happier your tenants are, the more extra services you're giving them and things that they can do, then the longer they will stay and the better tenants they will be. I always say, a happy tenant is a good tenant.
Absolutely.
And I guess, people are going to have to really think about that a bit more. I was a bit concerned as a landlord about, well, hang on a minute. So if we're relying on this rents to come in and then somebody plays with the law, which used to happen a lot in the early days of the short-hold tenancy, then by the time you actually get to a point of being able to take action and getting them out, quite a lot of months have gone by. So you do have to have, your reserves in place for those kind of things. But I guess from a bank's perspective, that's less of a concern, and more of a concern is, can I get vacant possession if everything goes pear-shaped?
That is a consideration for sure, and it is the sort of last resort consideration, really. The ideal game is that the tenants are happy, the landlord is professional, the money the bank has lent against that property is safe and secure, and they've got happy tenants who pay their rent, which ultimately pays their loan. And I think that's true whether you're a landlord or a lender, and a tenant too. And the Renters' Rights Act coming in, if you have a happy tenant who's paying their rent and you're a good landlord, it shouldn't pose too much of difficulty, because you want your property to be tenanted. Why would you want to churn your tenancies, which costs you money to get a new tenant, with all the things that need to be done, rather than having somebody who and you've had in your property for a long time, and they treat it with respect, and it's a working relationship, rather than constantly having new tenants coming in and you don't know who they are and what the quality of the tenant is. So I think from the perspective of the bank, the ideal is the same as it is for the landlord, that they have quality properties with good tenants in there paying their rent, which then pays the loan. And as the very last resort is that you need to get vacant possession on a property to do something with it. There's always the option of selling a portfolio with the tenants in there. And if it's a good working portfolio and something else has gone wrong in the background, then to sell the portfolio tenanted is an option, not necessarily to get vacant possession, but it is something that we do look at.
So what's the good news? No, there have been some easing up in regulations, so that if you've got track record as a renter, for example, that you could borrow.
You can
get a mortgage because you've proven that you can rent for so many decades. So talk to me a little bit about some of the light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, when it comes to borrowing and investing in property.
I think that development is a natural, sensible thing. If, as you say, if you've been able to demonstrate you can service the rent for however long at a level, which is usually higher than the mortgage you would need, then that is it's a natural thing to say, yeah, that looks like that could be a good risk. And the mortgage market reform that came in, the review that came in a few years back, tightened everything up and made it very, very difficult for people to get on the property ladder. That loosening has helped matters. But I think the big problem still remains at the moment that interest rates are a bit higher than people wanting to commit to, and the hope that interest rates will come down and mortgage rates will come down to enable them to buy a slightly better property and maybe have a slightly lesser deposit so that they can finish the place that they're buying is a consideration. So it does seem to be still a difficult market, even though it's easier to prove your ability to service a mortgage. I think people are still very cautious as to the route they go because the rates that are out there at the moment, although they're not, I don't believe they're that high relative to how they were, say, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
That low base rate environment and then the knock-on effect on mortgage rates was an artificial environment. And it may take time for people to accept that a little bit as the new norm, that rates around...
The last 5% was really good rate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
So that new norm is yet to, I think, to settle and bed in.
And what about products getting longer? Because I always imagine that, if people borrow, I mean, I certainly remember, I don't remember the details, but my first property, I think I put down 10% and borrowed 90%, and it went on for 25 years. So are we going to see that kind of market? Is there any sign of, making things available to people for a longer period of time so they're more affordable on a monthly basis?
I think if we're talking fixed rates, it's very hard in the market that we're in to have a fixed interest rate product at a reasonable interest rate for a very, very long period of time, because all these things are modelled against returns and where it's anticipated that base rate is going to be over a period of time. And the further out you go, the harder it is to model because there's so much more that could happen over that period of time. So sort of the 2 to 5 year fix is a pretty accepted sort of term. Beyond that, it becomes much more difficult and you're more likely to have a slightly higher interest rate. And it's, I suppose, whether you want to do that or not.
Well, you have to have variable one, I guess, if it's
right. Variable is, in terms of the variable rate product, I mean, most mortgages are modelled on a 25-year term.
Okay.
Assuming, but you'll be at that rate for 2-3 years.
Yeah.
And then you have to refix or reset your mortgage rate. So, and the variable rates are always going to have a margin on top of a core rate, and it's that core rate that might move. And people, I think, are nervous about variable rates because of that change. That if you imagine you started out on a variable rate when base rate was 0.1%, and now it was up at 5. That massive change.
Suddenly you're paying 4 times the amount you were.
Hurt. That has hurt. Yeah. I think where we are now, because base at this moment in time is at a slightly lower rate than it was 2 years ago. It's not the shift isn't quite so great in terms of when you're looking at a rate now to fix forward or to redo your mortgage. Whether lenders will go for 25-year committed rates is a difficult one because of that regulatory piece. It's costly, and the market will do something, and it's what the market usually leads the way, and somebody will start, and if somebody another lender sees that that's a good idea and it's working for that.
Markets find a way.
Yeah, the market will find a way.
Exactly. I mean, I've heard of 10-year lending already. So
And
that's
it
going
is
in that direction.
There's market demand, and there will be providers who will look at that demand and say, okay, can we model this and can we make it, and can we price it at a price that people are willing to adopt? And where that happy ground is found, that's where the market will move forward. Is that point where everybody is happy, the lender is happy with what they're getting, the borrower is happy with what they're paying, and they've got that certainty of 10 years.
Yeah. Certainly things will get better. That's the point, because, banks want to lend and people want to borrow. So it can only go in the direction of getting better.
I think that you made a comment earlier about contingency. And I think that's a key point, is contingency. Whenever you're doing anything like that, have that contingency in your back pocket for a shock.
Yes.
And then
I call it going to sleep money.
Yes.
So
and it's
put your head on your pillow
and
actually not worry.
It's a cushion.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is.
Exactly. That's like, it's like if I have a chunk of money sitting in an account, I don't consider, I've got money. I just consider I can sleep.
Yes. So
okay. Well, listen, it's been really, really interesting talking to you. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And if you are a person who's looking at your portfolio, trying to figure out what's the best next move for you, or you need finance advice, then do please get in touch with us and we'll try and help you in whichever way we can. Thank you very much again.
Thanks for listening to the London Property Podcast. If you'd like guidance on managing, protecting, or growing your property wealth, get in touch. We're here to help. And if this episode proved valuable, share it with someone who takes the market seriously and make sure you're following so you never miss an update.